The golden afternoon sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the Sistine Chapel, casting colorful patterns across the marble floors as Pope Leo XIV adjusted his simple white cap. At 68, he wasn't the youngest pope the Catholic Church had seen, but with his bright eyes and quick smile he carried a youthful energy that had charmed Catholics worldwide since his unexpected election 18 months ago. Your Holiness, the final preparations for tonight's charity gala are complete, said Sister Maria, his trusted assistant for many years, even before his papacy. The guest list includes diplomats from 27 countries and some of Europe's finest artists. Pope Leo nodded, his mind elsewhere. And the refugee aid organizations? Their representatives have good seats? Sister Maria smiled. This was typical of Leo, more concerned with the charity workers than the celebrities or politicians. Yes, Your Holiness. Front and center, as you requested. Leo XIV hadn't been born into privilege. As Giovanni Rossi, he'd grown up in a small farming village outside Naples, the son of a carpenter and a seamstress. Their tiny stone house had been filled with love, but little else. His path to priesthood had been driven by genuine faith and a desire to help others, not ambition. Even now, as the head of the Catholic Church, he maintained his humble ways, often slipping out to visit homeless shelters or children's hospitals without the usual papal entourage. And the pianist? He has everything he needs? Leo asked, picking up a briefing paper about the evening's entertainment. Yes, Anton Petrov arrived 2 hours ago. He's quite particular about the piano's tuning, but our staff has accommodated his requests. Leo skimmed the biography. Anton Petrov was considered one of the world's greatest living pianists, a Russian-born prodigy who had played his first concert at age 6 and now, at 43, commanded fees that could feed a small village for months. His recordings of Chopin and Liszt had won every major classical music award. He was also, according to the diplomatic note subtly included in the briefing, known for his sharp tongue and intolerance for what he called musical ignorance. His contribution is very generous, Leo remarked, noting that Petrov was performing without his usual fee. I must thank him personally. As the evening arrived, the Vatican's largest reception hall transformed into a glittering gathering of the powerful and privileged. All opened their wallets for a cause dear to the Pope's heart: relief for refugees fleeing conflict zones across the Middle East and North Africa. The hall hummed with conversation in dozens of languages, the air scented with expensive perfumes and the floral arrangements that decorated each table. Pope Leo XIV entered without fanfare, preferring to mingle directly with guests rather than make grand entrances. He moved from group to group, thanking everyone for their generosity while skillfully steering conversations toward the refugee crisis rather than church, politics, or trivial small talk. Your Holiness, called out the Italian Minister of Culture, you must meet Maestro Petrov. He was just telling us about his recent performance at Carnegie Hall. Leo turned to find himself face to face with the pianist, a tall, slim man with intense eyes and a precisely trimmed beard. Anton Petrov gave a slight bow that somehow managed to appear both respectful and condescending at once. It is an honor to have you here, Maestro, Leo said warmly, extending his hand. Your gift of music tonight will help thousands. The honor is mine, Petrov replied smoothly. Music should serve humanity, not merely entertain it. I couldn't agree more, Leo said, his face brightening. As a boy, I knew nothing of classical music. Our village church had only an old organ played by the priest's sister. But even our simple hymns brought community together and lifted spirits. That's the true power of music, wouldn't you say? Something flickered across Petrov's face. Surprise, perhaps, or disappointment. Indeed, he said after a brief pause. Although comparing village hymns to Bach or Beethoven is rather like comparing a child's crayon drawing to the ceiling of this very Vatican. A slight awkwardness fell over the small group. The culture minister coughed nervously. Well, we are all God's children making our art, Leo replied good-naturedly, apparently missing or choosing to ignore the pianist's condescension. I look forward to your performance tonight. Perhaps it will improve my limited musical education. The dinner proceeded with speeches about the refugee crisis, moving video testimonials, and enthusiastic pledges of support. By the time Anton Petrov took his place at the grand piano on the small stage, the evening had already raised millions for the cause. The pianist began with Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, his fingers dancing across the keys with supernatural precision. The room fell under his spell, caught in the emotional journey from the delicate opening notes to the thunderous conclusion. Even the waitstaff paused their work, standing silently along the walls to listen. Pope Leo sat entranced, his eyes closed at times, his hand occasionally keeping rhythm on his knee. When Petrov finished his third piece, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic, with Leo among the first to rise for a standing ovation. "Magnificent," the Pope exclaimed when the applause finally died down. "Truly the voice of God in your hands, Maestro Petrov." The pianist bowed deeply, basking in the adoration. But instead of leaving the stage, he adjusted his microphone. "Thank you all for your generous support of this worthy cause," Petrov began. "Before my final piece, I'd like to share a brief thought about music and appreciation." His eyes scanned the room before settling directly on Pope Leo. "I was intrigued earlier this evening when His Holiness compared village church hymns to classical masterpieces." A murmur ran through the crowd. Video cameras that had been documenting the event for Vatican media and international news outlets swiveled toward the stage. It reminded me of something my first teacher told me. To appreciate great music, one must first learn to truly listen. With all respect to His Holiness, comparing simple hymns to Bach is like comparing, well, plain bread to the miracle of transubstantiation. Gasps and uncomfortable shifting filled the room. The Vatican's press secretary stiffened, while several cardinals exchanged alarmed glances. Pope Leo's expression remained unchanged, his eyes fixed thoughtfully on the pianist. Perhaps the Church might consider a musical education program alongside its theological teachings, Petrov continued with a thin smile. After all, if its leader cannot distinguish between provincial folk tunes and the divine architecture of classical composition, what hope have its followers? The Vatican press secretary was now moving urgently toward the stage, but Petrov smoothly transitioned to his final piece before anyone could interrupt him. His fingers struck the opening chords of Liszt's Mephisto waltz with such force that any potential intervention was drowned out by the music. Through it all, Pope Leo sat perfectly still, his gentle smile never wavering, though those closest to him noticed a subtle shift in his eyes. Not anger, but something more complex, more thoughtful. As the final notes faded and uncertain applause rippled through the crowd, the Pope was the first to stand once more, clapping steadily while looking directly at the pianist. "Thank you, Maestro, for both your extraordinary music and your candid thoughts," Leo said, his voice somehow carrying across the room without seeming raised. "God gives each of us different gifts and perspectives. Tonight you've certainly given us much to reflect upon." The evening concluded awkwardly, with guests departing more quickly than planned. News crews immediately began broadcasting clips of the pianist's remarks, with commentators debating whether he had delivered a justified critique or an unforgivable insult. Back in his private apartment, Pope Leo dismissed his staff earlier than usual. "Even the Swiss Guard," he insisted gently when his security detail protested. "I need some quiet hours." Alone, he removed his formal vestments and sat in his favorite worn armchair by the window, looking out over the twinkling lights of Rome. On the small table beside him lay his old, leather-bound Bible, and next to it something few knew he owned. A small portable music player with inexpensive headphones. Leo picked up the player and scrolled through its contents, a modest collection of classical music he had been slowly teaching himself to appreciate since becoming pope. He pressed play on a piano concerto and closed his eyes, listening with intense concentration. After nearly an hour, he opened his eyes and reached for his journal, writing a single question: what if he's right? As midnight approached, while most of the Vatican still buzzed with shocked conversations about the evening's scandal, Pope Leo XIV made a decision that would surprise everyone, but that would have to wait until morning. Sleep did not come easily that night, but when it did, his dreams were filled with music more complex and beautiful than any village hymn he'd ever known. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Pope Leo's private chapel as he knelt in prayer. He'd been there since 4 a.m., long before the Vatican stirred to life. The events of last night's gala played over and over in his mind, alongside snippets of Anton Petrov's cutting remarks that had, by now, traveled across the globe via news outlets and social media. "Your Holiness," Sister Maria's voice was hesitant as she gently knocked on the chapel door. "Cardinal Bianchi is requesting an urgent meeting." The press office has received over 200 media inquiries overnight. Leo sighed, crossing himself before rising from his knees. His joints protested. He wasn't as young as he used to be, and the hours of kneeling hadn't helped. "Tell him I'll be there shortly," he replied, his voice quiet but steady. As Sister Maria's footsteps faded down the hallway, Leo remained standing before the simple wooden cross that hung in his private chapel. It wasn't ornate or gilded like many Vatican treasures. It was carved by his father, a reminder of his humble beginnings. "What would you have me do?" he whispered, not entirely sure if he was asking God, his late father, or himself. 20 minutes later, Pope Leo XIV sat at the head of a polished table in the papal offices, surrounded by 5 grim-faced cardinals and the Vatican's harried press secretary, a young man named Paolo, whose usual confident demeanor had given way to visible stress. "The situation is unprecedented. Your Holiness," Cardinal Bianchi said, sliding a tablet across the table with headlines from around the world. Piano man mocks Pope. Calls Pontiff musically ignorant. Vatican gala turns sour when pianist insults Pope Leo XIV. Petrov's papal. Put down, classical star criticizes Pope's provincial taste. "We must respond firmly," continued Bianchi, the oldest and most traditional of Leo's advisors. "This Petrov has shown disrespect not just to you personally, but to the office of the papacy and, by extension, to the Church itself." The press secretary nodded vigorously. "We've drafted a statement expressing disappointment in Maestro Petrov's remarks, while emphasizing the success of the fundraiser. We can release it within the hour." Cardinal Donato, known for his diplomatic skills, leaned forward. "Perhaps we should consider a more nuanced approach. The pianist's comments were inappropriate, certainly, but responding too strongly might elevate this beyond what it deserves." Leo listened carefully to each advisor, his fingers steepled before him, his expression thoughtful rather than troubled. When everyone had spoken, a heavy silence filled the room as they waited for his decision. "What does Maestro Petrov say this morning?" Leo asked finally. Paolo looked surprised by the question. He hasn't issued any statement, Your Holiness. His manager canceled his scheduled interviews and he's reportedly still in Rome but has not commented." "I see." Leo nodded slowly. "And the charity gala itself? Were we successful in our fundraising efforts?" "Extremely," confirmed Sister Maria, who had joined them midway through the meeting. "Despite the incident, we raised 12 million euros, nearly double our goal. The refugee relief organizations are overwhelmed with gratitude." "Then that is what matters most," Leo said firmly. Cardinal Bianchi frowned. "With all due respect, Your Holiness, we cannot simply ignore this insult. The faithful look to us to defend the dignity of the Church." "I understand your concern, Eminence," Leo replied gently. "But tell me in all honesty, was there not some truth in Maestro Petrov's words?" The room fell silent again, this time with a different quality, surprise, even shock. "I grew up singing hymns in a village church. I have never claimed to be a musical scholar," Leo continued. "My knowledge of classical music is indeed limited. These are simply facts." "But the way he said it, Your Holiness," protested Paolo. "The mockery, the public humiliation, pride," Leo interrupted softly, "is a sin I struggle with like any man. Perhaps I needed this reminder of my limitations." He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "I will consider all your counsel, but for now, no statement. Let us focus on the good that came from last night." As the cardinals filed out, Sister Maria remained, studying the Pope's face. They had known each other for nearly 40 years, since they were both working in a poor parish in Naples. "You're planning something," she said. Not a question, but a statement. Leo's lips curved into a small smile. "I'm simply reflecting on an opportunity, old friend." "An opportunity?" Most would see only an embarrassment. Christ taught us to turn the other cheek. But he never said we couldn't learn something while doing so. Leo walked to the window, looking out at St. Peter's Square below where tourists were already gathering for the day. "Have we kept any of those music appreciation books that the cultural minister sent last Christmas?" Sister Maria raised an eyebrow. "The illustrated guides to classical music?" "Yes, they're in the library. Why do you ask?" "Please have them brought to my study. And find out where Maestro Petrov is staying in Rome. I'll need to send him a message." Later that afternoon, alone in his study, Pope Leo pored over An Introduction to Classical Music, a beautifully illustrated volume that he'd previously glanced at only briefly. He had also listened to 3 of Petrov's recordings, forcing himself to focus on the structure and complexity of the music, rather than simply letting it wash over him as background beauty. There was so much he didn't understand. The technical terminology alone was daunting. Sonatas, concertos, symphonies, each with their own forms and rules. But beneath the complexity, he sensed something profound, something he wanted to grasp. A knock at the door interrupted his studies. Sister Maria entered with a folded note. "We've located Maestro Petrov. He's staying at Hotel Artemide until tomorrow morning. He's canceled his scheduled performance in Florence and appears to be avoiding public appearances." "Thank you," Leo said, taking a sheet of papal stationery from his desk drawer. "Please have a courier deliver this to him personally. No emails or phone calls. May I ask what you're planning to say to the man who humiliated you in front of the world?" There was an unusual edge to Sister Maria's voice. Leo looked up, pen poised over paper. "I'm going to thank him." "Thank him?" She couldn't hide her shock. "And then I'm going to ask him for help." Leo began writing in his neat, precise handwriting. Help with what exactly? Leo finished his note, folded it carefully, and sealed it with the papal stamp. "With understanding what I do not know." That evening, in a luxurious but now prison-like hotel suite, Anton Petrov paced back and forth like a caged animal. His phone had been ringing nonstop, his manager, concert promoters, journalists, even his mother from St. Petersburg. He'd answered none of the calls. What was I thinking? He muttered to himself for the 100th time. In 25 years of professional performing, he'd developed a reputation for brutal honesty about music. But he'd never crossed a line like this. Insulting the Pope, at a charity event no less. His manager had sent increasingly frantic text messages throughout the day. Damage control needed. ASAP. Vatican hasn't released statement yet. Good sign? 3 concert cancellations already. Florence, Milan, Vienna. Need to issue public apology now. But Petrov couldn't bring himself to draft the hollow apology his career desperately needed. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sorry for what he'd said, only for saying it publicly, for letting his frustration with musical ignorance override his sense of decorum. A knock at his door startled him from his thoughts, probably another journalist. He ignored it. The knock came again, more insistent. "Signore Petrov?" called a voice. "I have a personal delivery from His Holiness Pope Leo XIV. Petrov froze. This was it, an official rebuke, perhaps even an excommunication. Though not particularly religious, the thought made his stomach clench. With reluctance, he opened the door to find a young man in a simple black suit holding out a cream-colored envelope bearing the papal seal. "I was instructed to wait for a reply." "The courier," said Petrov, took the envelope and closed the door before the courier could see how his hands trembled as he broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short message in elegant handwriting. "Dear Maestro Petrov, thank you for your honesty last night, uncomfortable though it was to hear. You spoke a truth I have long known but perhaps needed to be reminded of in such a public way. I wonder if you might consider an unusual request. Would you be willing to give me piano lessons? Not for public show or publicity, but for my own understanding and appreciation of the beautiful art form to which you have dedicated your life. If this proposal interests you, please come to the Vatican tomorrow at 10 a.m. Sister Maria will meet you at the side entrance. No press, no publicity, just a teacher and a very novice student. With sincere admiration for your remarkable talent, Giovanni Rossi, Pope Leo XIV." Petrov read the note 3 times, certain he had misunderstood. The Pope wanted piano lessons? From him, after last night? He sat heavily on the edge of his bed, the note still in his hands. Of all possible responses, condemnation, demands for public apology, banishment from Vatican events, this was the last thing he had expected. What game was the Pope playing? Was this a trap, a chance to publicly humiliate him in return? Or perhaps a shrewd public relations move that would make Leo appear magnanimous while forcing Petrov into the role of penitent? Yet something in the handwritten note felt genuine. The Pope had signed with his birth name first, Giovanni Rossi, as if to emphasize that it was the man, not just the office, making this request. Petrov walked to the window, looking out at the Roman evening. The city lights glimmered under a darkening sky, and in the distance the dome of St. Peter's was illuminated against the night. After a long moment, he returned to the door and opened it. The courier stood waiting patiently. "Tell His Holiness," Petrov said slowly, "that I will come tomorrow at 10 a.m. As the courier departed with his message, Anton Petrov realized that for the first time since last night's disaster, he felt something close to peace. Whether this was absolution, opportunity, or something else entirely remained to be seen. The next morning arrived with unexpected clarity for Anton Petrov. He'd slept surprisingly well after accepting the Pope's invitation, as if some weight had lifted from his shoulders. Still, as his taxi approached the Vatican, doubts began to creep back in. What exactly was he getting himself into? The cab dropped him at a discreet side entrance where a nun with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes waited. She wore a simple black habit and a no-nonsense expression that reminded Petrov of his first piano teacher. "Sister Maria," she introduced herself with a brisk nod. "Please follow me, Maestro." No photographers, no press, no curious onlookers, just as the Pope had promised. Sister Maria led him through a series of corridors, past startled-looking priests and Vatican employees who clearly recognized him but were too professional to comment. "His Holiness has set aside 90 minutes this morning," Sister Maria explained as they walked. "He has cleared his schedule specifically for this." "I'm still not entirely sure what this is," Petrov admitted. "I've never given a piano lesson to a pope?" Sister Maria finished with the hint of a smile. "I imagine not. But perhaps it would help to know that before he was Pope Leo XIV, he was simply Giovanni Rossi, a parish priest who loved his congregation and had a decent singing voice, if not much musical training." They arrived at an unmarked wooden door. Sister Maria knocked twice, then opened it without waiting for a response. The room beyond was not what Petrov had expected. Instead of ornate papal quarters, he found himself in a modest study lined with bookshelves. Natural light streamed through tall windows, illuminating a simple desk, several comfortable chairs, and, somewhat incongruously, an upright piano that had seen better days. Pope Leo XIV stood as they entered. He had exchanged his formal papal attire for a simple black cassock, with only a white collar and small silver cross to denote his office. "Maestro Petrov, thank you for coming," Leo said, extending his hand with genuine warmth. "I appreciate your willingness to consider my unusual request." Petrov found himself shaking the Pope's hand before he could think of a suitably formal response. Up close, Leo looked older than he had on stage, the lines around his eyes deeper, his white hair thinner, but those eyes held the same gentle intelligence that had struck Petrov during their brief interaction at the gala. "I'm still not certain I understand what you're asking of me, Your Holiness," Petrov said carefully. Leo gestured to the piano. "It's quite simple, really. I wish to learn, not to play professionally, of course, but to understand, to appreciate music as more than pleasant background sound." He smiled self-deprecatingly. "To move beyond my provincial tastes, as you put it." Petrov winced at the reminder of his words. "About that night, Your Holiness," Leo raised a hand. "No apologies necessary. We're here to look forward, not backward." Sister Maria cleared her throat. "I'll leave you gentlemen to it. There's water and coffee on the side table." She fixed Petrov with a look that somehow managed to be both warning and encouragement. "His Holiness has his next appointment at 11:30. After she left, an awkward silence filled the room. Petrov stood uncomfortably, unsure of protocol. Did one sit in the presence of the Pope without being invited? Was there some formal way to begin? Leo seemed to sense his discomfort. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to the piano bench. "And if it helps perhaps for these lessons, you could think of me as Giovanni rather than as Pope Leo." "I'm not sure I can do that," Petrov admitted. "No? Well, then consider this. In this room, you are the authority, not I." Leo sat in one of the armchairs near the piano. "I am merely a student with much to learn." Petrov approached the piano cautiously, running his fingers over the keys. It was a Bechstein, probably 40 years old, adequately maintained, but nothing like the concert grands he was accustomed to playing. Still, it had a warm tone and reasonable action. "When was the last time this was tuned?" he asked, playing a quick scale. Last week, in preparation for your visit, Leo replied. Is it acceptable? It will do, Petrov said, then caught himself. I mean, yes, it's a lovely instrument. The Pope laughed, a genuine warm sound. You see, already I'm learning something. The proper maintenance of a piano. He leaned forward. Tell me, where should we begin? Scales, music theory? Or perhaps you should first assess how little I know. Petrov considered the question seriously. This was not a typical student, not a reluctant child forced into lessons by ambitious parents, nor a hobbyist seeking simple pleasure. This was, well, the Pope, but more importantly, a man genuinely seeking understanding. We begin with listening, Petrov decided, sitting straighter on the bench. Before you can appreciate music, you must learn to truly hear it. What followed was unlike any lesson Petrov had ever given. He began by playing simple pieces, a Bach minuet, a Mozart sonata movement, asking Leo to describe what he heard, not in technical terms, but in emotions and images. It feels like walking through a garden, Leo said hesitantly after one piece, orderly but with unexpected beauty around each corner. Good, Petrov said, surprised by the aptness of the description. That's Bach, mathematical precision creating space for emotional discovery. Leo proved to be an attentive student, asking thoughtful questions and absorbing Petrov's explanations about musical structure, harmony, and historical context. There was no pretension in his interest, only genuine curiosity. An hour passed quickly. Petrov found himself enjoying the role of teacher more than he had anticipated, especially with a student so earnest in his desire to learn. May I try? Leo asked finally, nodding toward the piano. Petrov hesitated. It takes years of practice to— Oh, I harbor no illusions about playing like you, Leo assured him with a chuckle. But perhaps just a few notes to feel the difference between hearing and creating. Petrov moved from the bench, allowing the Pope to sit. Leo placed his hands on the keys with obvious uncertainty. Just the right hand for now, Petrov instructed, positioning Leo's fingers on the keys for a simple C major scale. Press each key deliberately, listening to each note. Leo pressed the first key, then the next, his movements cautious but determined. The notes rang out unevenly, some too loud, some too soft. The rhythm inconsistent, but his face showed complete concentration. It's much harder than it looks, Leo admitted after finishing the scale. Everything worthwhile is, Petrov replied. On impulse, he added, if you're serious about learning, it would require regular practice. Daily, ideally. I wake at 4 each morning, Leo said. I could practice then before my official duties begin. The seriousness of his commitment took Petrov aback. You would need a teacher. Regular lessons. Are you offering, Maestro? Leo asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them. Petrov had commitments, a European tour, recording sessions, master classes at conservatories. And yet, I'll be in Rome for the next 3 weeks, he heard himself saying. We could arrange something, perhaps twice weekly. Leo's face brightened. I would be honored. A knock at the door signaled the end of their time. Sister Maria entered, looking curiously between the two men. Your next appointment is here, Your Holiness, she said. Leo stood reluctantly. Same time Thursday? Petrov nodded, surprised by his own eagerness. I'll prepare some materials for you to study, and perhaps some recordings to listen to with different ears than before. As Sister Maria led him back through the Vatican corridors, Petrov tried to make sense of what had just happened. He had come expecting, what, a publicity stunt? A veiled demand for a public apology? Instead, he had found a genuine student and potentially something he hadn't realized he was missing, a purpose beyond performance. He means it, doesn't he? Petrov asked Sister Maria as they approached the exit. This isn't just for show, she regarded him thoughtfully. In 38 years, I've never known Giovanni Rossi to do anything just for show. After a pause, she added, but I should warn you, Maestro, when he commits to something, he commits completely. Outside, the bright Roman sun momentarily blinded Petrov as he stepped into St. Peter's Square. Tourists milled about, some taking photos, others consulting guidebooks. None paid him any particular attention, just another visitor leaving the Vatican. His phone buzzed in his pocket. His manager, no doubt, with more news of canceled concerts and angry promoters. For the first time in days, Petrov felt like he could face the fallout from his actions. He had insulted one of the world's most revered figures and, instead of condemnation, had been offered understanding and a chance at redemption. As he walked away from the Vatican, Petrov found himself mentally compiling a lesson plan for the Pope. Simple pieces to begin with, recordings that would illustrate the evolution of classical music, perhaps even some theory texts written for beginners rather than professionals. His phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. With a sigh, he answered it. "Anton, where have you been? The situation is getting worse. Your Zurich performance has been canceled too, and the Vienna Philharmonic is reconsidering next season's residency," his manager rattled off without preamble. "I need you to clear my schedule for Thursday mornings for the next 3 weeks," Petrov replied calmly. "What? Are you listening to me? Your career is imploding and you're making schedule changes?" "Yes," Petrov said, a strange sense of peace settling over him. "I have a new student." "A student? You haven't taken a student in years. Who is it, someone important?" Petrov smiled to himself as he hailed a taxi. "You could say that. Perhaps the most important student I'll ever have." 3 weeks turned into 6, and 6 weeks stretched into 3 months. Twice a week, like clockwork, Anton Petrov arrived at the Vatican side entrance at precisely 10 a.m. Sister Maria would greet him with a nod that had gradually warmed from suspicious to respectful, and lead him to the study that now felt almost familiar. What had begun as an unusual arrangement had transformed into something neither man had expected. "A genuine friendship. Your hands are still too tense," Petrov said one autumn morning, watching Pope Leo struggle with a simple Clementi sonatina. "Remember what we discussed about wrist position?" Leo flexed his fingers and tried again, his brow furrowed in concentration. At 68, his hands weren't as nimble as a young student's, but what he lacked in natural dexterity he made up for in determination. "Better," Petrov nodded as the melody emerged more smoothly. "Now try to feel the phrase as a complete thought, not just individual notes." From their initial awkward lesson, they had developed a comfortable rhythm. Leo practiced daily in the pre-dawn hours before his papal duties began, and Petrov had become an exacting but patient teacher, pushing when necessary, but understanding the constraints of his unusual student's position and age. "I've been listening to the recordings you lent me," Leo said as he finished the piece, hands dropping to his lap. "The Beethoven sonatas. They're extraordinary, like hearing someone wrestle with God and sometimes win." Petrov smiled, pleased by the insight. "That's a remarkably apt description. Beethoven wasn't a conventionally religious man, but his music engages with the divine more directly than perhaps any composer before or since." Leo reached for his water glass, taking a thoughtful sip. "It makes me wonder what he might have composed had he been able to hear his own later works." "A tragedy and a miracle in one," Petrov agreed. "To create such sounds in silence." He hesitated, then added, "I've prepared something different for today if you're willing." Leo's eyes lit with curiosity. "Of course." Petrov moved to the piano, flexing his fingers briefly before placing them on the keys. "This is Debussy's Clair de Lune, Moonlight. It's from a different musical world than Bach or Beethoven. The Impressionist composers were less concerned with strict structure and more with creating atmosphere, feeling, color." He began to play, the familiar notes floating through the room like mist. The piece was deceptive in its apparent simplicity, delicate yet technically demanding, with subtle shifts in tempo and dynamics that required both precision and emotional intuition. Leo closed his eyes, listening with the focused attention he had learned over their months together. When the final notes faded, he remained silent for several moments. "It's like watching moonlight on water," he said finally. "Constantly shifting yet somehow eternal." Petrov nodded, satisfied with the response. "I think this piece might suit you." Leo's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Surely it's far beyond my abilities." "Not the entire piece, not yet," Petrov conceded. "But perhaps the opening section. The technical demands are reasonable, and it would give you something to work toward, a piece you could eventually play all the way through. Not just exercises and fragments." The hope that bloomed on Leo's face made him look suddenly younger. "You think I could learn it?" "With practice, yes. It would take time, months probably, but it's achievable." Petrov pulled sheet music from his case and set it on the piano. "Shall we begin?" For the remainder of their lesson, they worked on just the first few measures, breaking down the finger positions, the gentle rhythm, the precise weight needed to make the notes sing without becoming heavy. As their time drew to a close, Sister Maria entered with her customary knock. Over the months, she had taken to bringing coffee and small pastries toward the end of their sessions, allowing the two men to chat informally for a few minutes before the Pope's next appointment. "Cardinal Bianchi was asking about you this morning," she mentioned casually as she set down the tray. "He seems quite curious about these ongoing lessons." Leo sighed, accepting a cup of espresso. "The good cardinal remains concerned that I'm being too familiar with someone who publicly criticized the church. Criticized your musical taste," Petrov corrected with a wry smile. "Not quite the same thing. To some in the Vatican, any criticism of the Pope might as well be heresy," Leo replied good-naturedly. "Fortunately, I'm still technically the boss." Sister Maria snorted softly. "That doesn't stop them from talking. The rumor mill has been quite active. Some are saying you're planning a concert." Leo nearly choked on his coffee. "A concert, me? Good heavens, no. Actually," Petrov set down his cup thoughtfully, "it's not entirely absurd." Both Leo and Sister Maria stared at him. "I don't mean a public performance," Petrov clarified quickly, "but perhaps a small private demonstration of what you've learned. For Christmas, maybe. Just a simple piece for a few guests." Leo shook his head firmly. "I'm nowhere near ready for anyone to hear me play. I can barely manage scales without stumbling." "You're being too modest," Petrov insisted. "Your progress has been remarkable for someone starting so late in life. And the Debussy, just the opening section, would be perfect. Simple enough to be achievable, but beautiful enough to be meaningful." Sister Maria was watching Leo carefully. "The children's hospital visit is scheduled for Christmas Eve," she reminded him. "You always bring gifts and spend time with the patients." Leo's expression shifted as he considered this. "The children. Yes, that might be different. They wouldn't judge a beginner too harshly." "They would be delighted," Sister Maria confirmed. "And it would give you a concrete goal to work toward." Petrov could see Leo warming to the idea despite his initial resistance. 3 months until Christmas," he pointed out. "More than enough time to prepare a short piece if you practice diligently." "I would need to practice more than just mornings," Leo mused, almost to himself. "I could come 3 times a week instead of 2, Petrov offered. Leo glanced up, surprised. "But your concert schedule has actually been quite manageable lately." This was an understatement. While the initial cancellations had stung, Petrov had found himself increasingly selective about which engagements to accept. Preferring to spend more time in Rome, his manager was baffled but had stopped arguing once it became clear that Petrov was serious about his commitment to his mysterious Vatican student. Leo studied him for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Very well then. A Christmas performance for the children's hospital. Just one piece, nothing ambitious." "Excellent," Petrov said, feeling inexplicably pleased. "We'll begin serious work on the Debussy next session." As Petrov was escorted out that day, he found himself mentally rearranging his schedule to accommodate the increased lessons. He had performances in Paris and London in the coming weeks, but he could fly back to Rome between them. It would be exhausting, but somehow the thought didn't bother him as it once would have. "You've changed him, you know," Sister Maria said quietly as they approached the exit. "I've merely taught him some basic piano skills." Petrov demurred. She shook her head. "It's more than that. He's always been a good man, but lately there's a lightness to him. A joy I haven't seen in years." Petrov didn't know how to respond to this. "And you've changed too, Maestro," she added perceptively. Before he could ask what she meant, they were interrupted by a young priest hurrying toward them. "Sister Maria, there you are. His Holiness is needed urgently. The American cardinal has arrived early for his meeting." Sister Maria nodded. "I'll inform him immediately." She turned back to Petrov. "Until Thursday, Maestro." Left alone at the side exit, Petrov stood for a moment in the autumn sunlight, considering Sister Maria's words. Had he changed, perhaps? The burning anger that had fueled much of his career, the contempt for audiences who couldn't truly appreciate musical brilliance, the frustration with a world that treated art as entertainment, had softened somehow. Teaching Leo had reminded him of something he'd forgotten, the pure joy of music discovered for the first time. Watching the Pope's face light up when he successfully played even a simple phrase, had rekindled Petrov's own love for the art beyond its technical demands. His phone vibrated. A text from his manager. Berlin Philharmonic wants you for spring season. 3 concerts, your choice of repertoire. Need answer today. Once, this would have been an automatic yes. One of the world's great orchestras offering artistic freedom was a rare opportunity. Now Petrov found himself checking the dates against his mental calendar of Vatican lessons. April? After Easter? He texted back. Yes, late April, does that work? Petrov thought of the Pope's determined practice, the Christmas performance goal, and what might come after. Yes, April works, but I need Thursdays and Mondays free through December. There was a long pause before his manager replied, Whatever you say, maestro. Your new student must be very important. Petrov smiled to himself as he pocketed his phone. More important than either of us realized, he thought as he walked away from the Vatican, already planning the next lesson in his head. Snow fell gently outside the windows of Pope Leo's study on the morning of December 24th, dusting Rome with a rare white Christmas. Inside, the atmosphere was tense with concentration as Petrov listened to Leo play Clair de Lune, for perhaps the 100th time. Your left hand is still too heavy in measure 16, Petrov noted, his critical ear catching every nuance. Remember, it should support the melody, not compete with it. Leo nodded, wiping his brow. For 3 months they had worked tirelessly on this single piece, or rather, the first 2 minutes of it. The opening section of Debussy's masterpiece was all Leo had committed to playing, but he was determined to play it perfectly. Once more, Leo said, positioning his hands over the keys with the careful attention of someone handling something precious. At 68, his fingers weren't naturally nimble, but months of daily practice had given them a surprising dexterity. This time, as the familiar notes filled the room, Petrov closed his eyes. The tempo was slower than a concert pianist would take it, and there were tiny hesitations between some of the chord changes, but there was something else present too, something that couldn't be taught. A sincerity, a humility in the approach to the music that gave it a unique poignancy. When Leo finished, Petrov opened his eyes to find the Pope looking at him anxiously. Well? Leo asked. It's ready, Petrov said simply. You're ready. Relief washed over Leo's face, followed quickly by renewed nervousness. The children will be kind listeners, I'm sure, but what if I freeze? Or forget the notes? Petrov, who had performed for presidents and royalty, found it oddly touching that the leader of the Catholic Church was anxious about playing for sick children. You won't forget. We've practiced too thoroughly for that, and if you make a small mistake, which everyone does, even professionals, you'll keep going. The music is bigger than any single note. Sister Maria entered, bringing their usual coffee. Over the months, these post-lesson moments had become a cherished ritual for all 3. Everything is arranged at the hospital, she reported. A good piano recently tuned. The staff have been sworn to secrecy about the special performance. The children know only that their Christmas Eve visit from the Pope will include a surprise. Leo took a deep breath. I still think this is madness. A Pope who can barely play a tempting Debussy. A Pope who couldn't play at all 6 months ago, Petrov corrected, now playing one of the most beloved pieces in the repertoire. It's not madness, it's a testament to dedication and humility. Speaking of which, Sister Maria interjected, pulling an envelope from her pocket. The Vatican press office received this yesterday. I thought you both should see it before making any decisions. She handed the envelope to Leo. Inside was a letter from a major classical music magazine. They had somehow gotten wind of the Pope's piano lessons and were requesting an exclusive interview with both Leo and Petrov about their unusual teacher-student relationship. How did they find out? Leo wondered aloud. The Vatican is like a small village, Sister Maria replied with a shrug. Secrets rarely stay secret for long. Petrov felt a flash of his old defensiveness. We don't have to respond. What happens in these lessons is private. Leo studied the letter thoughtfully. Perhaps. Or perhaps there's something valuable in sharing this journey. He looked up at Petrov. What began with a public insult could end with a public lesson in humility and growth, for both of us. Let's focus on today first, Petrov suggested, uncomfortable with the idea of publicity. The children are waiting. Hours later, Leo and Petrov arrived at Rome's largest children's hospital through a private entrance. Sister Maria had gone ahead to ensure everything was prepared. A small upright piano had been placed in the hospital's cheerfully decorated common room, where 30 children of various ages were gathered, many in wheelchairs or with IV poles beside them. Hospital staff and a few parents stood around the edges of the room, their faces lighting up as the Pope entered. Leo was dressed simply in a white cassock with minimal ceremonial elements, making him more approachable for the children. For the next hour, Leo moved among the young patients with genuine warmth, kneeling to speak with each child individually, offering small gifts and blessings. Petrov watched from a distance, struck by how naturally Leo connected with the children, not as a remote religious figure but as a kind-hearted elder who took their concerns seriously. Eventually, Sister Maria caught Leo's eye and nodded toward the piano. The moment had come. Leo approached the center of the room. "My dear children," he began, his voice gentle but clear, "Christmas is a time of gifts, and you have already given me a wonderful gift today with your courage and your smiles. I wanted to offer you something special in return, something I've been learning." A curious murmur ran through the room as Leo sat at the piano. Petrov could see the Pope's hands trembling slightly as he positioned them over the keys. "I should warn you," Leo continued with a self-deprecating smile. "I'm very much a beginner. But my teacher," he nodded toward Petrov, "has been extraordinarily patient. This is Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece about moonlight and dreams and finding beauty in the quiet moments." Leo took a deep breath, closed his eyes briefly in concentration, and began to play. The first notes hung in the air, delicate and hesitant, but accurate. As he continued, Petrov could see Leo's tension gradually melt away, replaced by the focused absorption they had worked to achieve. The Pope's interpretation was deliberate, each note given space to breathe, creating a meditative quality that suited the piece perfectly. The children watched in rapt silence. Even the youngest one seemed transfixed by the gentle music and the sight of the Pope, his face a study in concentration and joy, bringing this beautiful piece to life. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of perfect silence before the room erupted in applause. Leo looked up, his face flushed with exertion and emotion. A small girl in the front row, no more than 6 years old with a colorful scarf covering her hairless head, raised her hand. "Yes, my child?" Leo said. "Could you play it again?" She asked, her eyes wide. "It sounded like what angels must sound like." Leo looked to Petrov, who nodded encouragingly. "Of course," the Pope said, turning back to the piano with newfound confidence. The second performance was even better than the first, more fluid, more assured. Petrov watched with a teacher's pride as his most unlikely student shared the gift of music with these children, who had known too much suffering in their young lives. Afterward, as hospital staff served Christmas cookies and hot chocolate, the little girl approached Leo. "I'm learning piano too," she confided, "but I'm not very good yet." Leo knelt to her level. "Neither am I," he whispered conspiratorially. "But my teacher says the secret is to practice every day and never give up, even when it's difficult." "Does it get easier?" she asked. Leo considered this thoughtfully. "The playing gets easier with practice, but the music, truly understanding and feeling the music, that's a journey that never ends. That's what makes it wonderful." As they prepared to leave, Sister Maria handed Leo a stack of children's drawings, thank you notes created during his performance. "They want you to come back and play again," she said. "Perhaps for Easter," Leo replied, looking through the colorful artwork with a smile. "By then I might manage the entire piece." Outside the hospital, evening had fallen and the Christmas lights of Rome twinkled in the distance. Petrov and Leo stood for a moment in the cold night air. "Thank you," Leo said simply. Petrov shook his head. "I should be thanking you. When I insulted you at that gala, I never imagined that we would end up here," Leo finished. "God works in mysterious ways, Maestro." "Indeed," Petrov agreed, though his thoughts were less about divine intervention and more about human connection. How an impulsive moment of arrogance had led to one of the most meaningful teaching experiences of his career. "About that magazine interview," Leo said as they walked toward the waiting Vatican car. "I think we should do it." Petrov raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "Yes. Not to draw attention to ourselves, but to share something important. That criticism, when accepted with humility, can lead to growth. That it's never too late to learn something new. That teachers and students have much to offer each other. Leo smiled. Besides, I think the story of a cranky pianist and a musically ignorant pope finding common ground might inspire a few people. As they drove back through the snowy streets of Rome, Petrov found himself thinking about the unlikely journey of the past 6 months. From a public insult to a private performance, from antagonism to friendship, from pride to humility, both of them had been transformed. The car passed St. Peter's Basilica, magnificent in its Christmas illumination. In the new year, Petrov would return to his concert schedule, playing in the great halls of Europe. Leo would continue his papal duties, leading his global flock. But the Monday and Thursday mornings would remain sacred, reserved for lessons that had become much more than music. "Merry Christmas, Giovanni," Petrov said softly, using the Pope's given name for the first time. Leo smiled, understanding the significance of this small gesture. "Merry Christmas, my friend," he replied. "May the music continue."